Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Larry Snowdy, and this is Interview, and I am sitting here in the Pabst Theater, and I'm sitting with Frank Coniff from Mystery Science Theater 3000 and also from Cinematic Titanic, which is the reason why we're here tonight is because of Cinematic Titanic. Frank, we're very proud to have you here. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm great, thank you, and it's great to be here.
I'm really glad to hear that, and hopefully at the end of the interview, you'll still think that. All right. You were not originally from Minnesota. You're from New York.
Yes, I grew up in Manhattan.
Now, do you think that the fact that you grew up in New York and Manhattan, that you had a different sense of sensibilities comedy-wise, that helped your comedy compared to the Minnesota, the Midwest area?
Well, I think in terms of the other people on Mystery Science Theater, I think we had very similar comedic sensibilities, which is why we worked so well together. And, but they did a lot of Wisconsin, Tommy Bartlett,
cheddar cheese,
so a lot of Wisconsin jokes that sometimes had to be explained to me. I'd never heard of Tommy Bartlett before I was hanging out with those guys.
How actually did you get to Minnesota from New York? I mean, that not many people go, I live in New York and Minnesota is the place for me.
Well, if a lot of people in New York, if they knew about Minneapolis, they might say that because it's a great city and it's a much kind of an easier way of life there with all the accoutrements of a smart and sophisticated big city. But I ended up going there because in my youth I had a bit of a drug and alcohol problem. By a bit, I mean a lot, and I was sent to Minnesota to go into drug rehab, of which they have many great drug and rehab facilities. They have a great recovery community there. So I moved there for that, and then I'm like, hey, this is great here. And then I stayed, and then it was like 1985 when at the height of the stand-up comedy boom of the 80s, and Minneapolis had an incredible stand-up comedy scene with a lot of great comedians who I became friends with and I'm friends with to this day. And it was just a wonderful thing, that it was just a serendipitous thing, and then that led to me being on Mystery Science Theater, which was done in Minneapolis. So it was just, the whole thing was just a gigantic blessing.
Well, when you actually were hired for Mystery Science Theater, you were originally hired on just as a writer, from what I understand.
Yes, I was hired as a writer. I think it was in their head that I would, because Josh had already left the show and they hired me, and I think they were considering me seriously to be the mad scientist apprentice, sidekick, but it wasn't. It wasn't set in stone. And then I think there was also some feeling that maybe I would do Servo, but Joel claims, and I don't remember this, Joel claims that I worked the Servo puppet one time, and then that I revealed myself as a horrible puppeteer, and he never wanted me to go near a puppet again. I don't remember that, but that's what Joel says.
When you found out that you were going to be playing TVs Frank, what was the realization when it happened? Did they just come up and go, okay, you're going to do this character? Or what went through your head, man?
Well, they just said, there wasn't any big thing about it. It was just like, I think we did a test or something, and before we started actually filming the shows, and it just felt right, and I didn't even really think that much about it because I was just thrilled to be there as a writer. If they had just had me on as a writer, I still would have been really happy because I consider myself a writer first and foremost, and so I was just excited about that. And then when I got to be TVs Frank, that was just the cherry on top of the sundae, kind of.
Well, it seems like the more that you were there, the more responsibility you ended up getting. Even after a while, you were picking the movies that they were going to be riffing on. Mm-hmm. Was there a certain criteria that you had what movies you wanted to pick on, or something you were looking for?
Certain movies, it's just when you saw them, you knew they were right. It's kind of like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. You don't know what it is. You can't say what it is, but you know it when you see it. And So some movies, and people always ask, are there movies that are too bad even for Mystery Science Theater? And the answer to that is thousands. There are thousands of movies that are too bad for Mystery Science Theater. Some of them you can't hear the dialogue, you can't see what's going on. Some of them are just so slowly paced that it would be too much of an effort to make them funny. They just have to have that kind of right balance of being really bad, yet there's a story, and yet you can hear and see what's going on most of the time, and also you can't have a lot of dialogue in a movie, because I think they figured out before, in the season or two before I came, I think they figured out that if you do riffs over dialogue, it's not as effective as if you do a riff when there's nothing else being said. Yeah, when there's a space, exactly.
Were there any movies that you wish you could have done, or wish that you would have done?
Well, I remember like I wanted to do Bela Lugosi meets the Brooklyn Gorilla, and because I was obsessed with the comedy team of Sammy Perillo and Duke Mitchell, who were Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis ripoff, but the excitement was not shared by anyone else. And then there were movies that we wanted to do that then we couldn't get the rights to them. Like there was a Elvis movie that came in a batch called Charo. It's a Western, and we screened it, and we riffed like crazy on it. We were having a great time. We were like, this is going to be the great. And I think we were just naive to think that we were ever going to get the rights to an Elvis. Sometimes, who knows how that tape got into the box of the tapes we want. And then there was the Lily Tomlin, John Travolta movie, Moment by Moment. We got that, and then we wanted to do that, but then we couldn't get the rights to it.
Wow, quite an eclectic thing there.
Yeah.
Was there any film that you wish that you guys didn't do? Or that you wish that you could have done it better or taken it back?
Well, I think all of them, you probably, when you look at it, you go, oh, we probably could have come up with a better line for that moment or that moment. But there's no film that I would say, oh, we never should have done that movie. I mean, there were like a couple of the movies we did, like for instance, we did Marooned, which was called Space Travelers. And it had like Gregory Peck and Gene Hackman. It was like a great cast, and it was directed by John Sturges, who's a great director. This is not a great movie, but I'm glad it was fun to do at the time, because just as a change of pace to have actual stars in a movie, But then then there's also a feeling of like, well, you know what, John Sturges is a great filmmaker. Maybe we shouldn't be making
too much fun of him.
Making fun of him, but so stuff like like the some of the movies, like the Sampo movie that might have been The Day the Earth Froze. Okay. Like, it wasn't really that bad a movie. It looked kind of beautiful, and it had some like real fantastical, but I think it was just goofy, and so that's why we did it. But I kind of am a believer in like really making fun of bad movies, Okay.
Well, after MST3K, you ended up working on Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yes, I did.
Now that's it's a weekly ABC series compared to doing a public. Well, I don't want to say public access, but to a cable show.
Right.
Was there a huge difference in the writing styles for both of those, or?
Well, I think in some ways it's very similar, because you're sitting in a room with a bunch of other comedy writers, just like on Mystery Science Theater, and you're pitching jokes. But in the case of Sabrina, you're also pitching story ideas and character arcs and act breaks and things like that. It's a different. It uses a different set of tools. But I would say that the main difference in terms of the end product, I mean, Sabrina was a delightful show. It's a kids show, and kids still love it to this day. It doesn't necessarily reflect my comedic sensibility in the way that Mystery Science Theater does, which completely reflects my comic sensibility. But it was also it's fun to work on something that's not necessarily where you're at, but you kind of learn things to do stuff like that that's out of your previous comfort zone, you know.
So you grow as an artist that way.
Well, some people do. I never did, of course, but I've heard of it happening.
Now, I follow you on Facebook, and I also follow you on Twitter, and you're pretty political on a lot of the stuff that you put out there. Now, is that something that you've always been? You've always been pretty political, or is it something that's just come across lately, and you're like, I want to tell people about this? Or
it's been I've always been interested in political things. My dad was a journalist, and he ran for Congress when I was a kid in 1964. So I've always kind of been around it a bit. But as a stand-up comedian, I never did a lot of political stuff because topical material is, it works great once or twice, and then by a week later it's old news. So when you're developing, at least when I was developing a stand-up act, like I wanted it to be stuff that could really do all over the place and for a length of time. So I didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff in my stand-up. But then when I started posting on Twitter and Facebook, for me, like, it became, I decided, I want to write jokes on Twitter. I want to publish jokes on Twitter, and topical material it really works on Twitter, I find, because because every tweet is forgotten about anyway. Like, like 5 minutes later, it's like Twitter is so of the moment, So it's a good venue for writing jokes about what's going on, and so when I decided I was going to be writing jokes for Twitter and Facebook, I'm like, well, what am I going to write a joke about? Well, what am I interested in? And that's what I'm reading in the paper that day. That's, every day, even before I started doing it, I was always going to, Talking Points Memo, Huffington Post, Think Progress, Crooks and Line, all my favorite political blogs, and getting all my, and so that's where all my material came from. But then coincidentally, around the same time, I started doing Jimmy Dore's radio show, which is a very political show. And then I'm also doing David Feldman's radio show, which also has a big political bent to it. So I've just kind of fallen into, it's a very natural part of my sensibility, but I've just kind of, fallen into it. Without really planning to.
It just kind of happened.
Just kind of happened, yeah.
And going with it, all right? Going with the flow of the universe. I got it. Now, you're here with Cinematic Titanic. You're back movie riffing. Did it take you a while to get back into the groove, or is it just something that's just natural to you?
I think it comes pretty naturally, I don't remember when we first started it being any kind of, I've got to get back into the groove. We were just all really happy to be working together again, and it was really fun right from the start. And then the unexpected thing was the live shows weren't even a big part of our plan when we started. When we started, we were just going to do DVDs and see what happened, and we ended up doing a live show up at Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's company. We did a show for them there. That was our first live show ever, and it was an amazing experience, and the audience laughed, and it was great. And then we realized, since we all have a background in stand-up comedy, it felt really natural, and that's another thing that just evolved naturally. That, Cinematic Titanic is really mostly about live performing, and that's what it became. And then we were booked into a film festival not long after that, and we did that, and it was a blast. And then from then on, we just decided, we really want to do this live all over the place.
How nervous were you on that first one when you guys were at ILM? Right before you go out on the stage, were there butterflies in the stomach?
A little bit, but it was a pretty safe, supportive environment. That's kind of our perfect crowd for us. They're they were, and they invited us up there. Yeah, they invited us there, so it was a very comfortable thing.
Well, Frank, we really appreciate the time. We thank you so much. If people want to follow you on Facebook, or if they want to follow you on Twitter, what do they look up for Twitter?
I guess just go to Twitter / Frank Coniff, and the same thing with Facebook. Just Google in my name
And it should show up
look
right there.
look for me. And I'd love to have. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that would be great. And people can now on Facebook. You can subscribe, even if you're not a friend. You can subscribe to status updates. So people want to do that.
All right, Frank, we greatly appreciate your time. We thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snowdy, Frank Coniff. I'll be right back.